Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is the Yukitsu Times. Welcome to my channel, welcome back to a little bit of Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about the merchant fleets for the Tau. And this is going to be, again, the low-level guide to them when you just start out with them. So we're only going to be talking about what you start off with. So, unlike with the Imperial Navy, this is a faction that does not necessarily need the higher level gear to function, but unlike the Craft World Eldar, where all their higher level stuff is absolute trash, these guys do get noticeably more powerful as you advance in it. So, unlike with other factions, I think that these guys are the one of the few that linearly increase in terms of power without necessarily gaining more broad options. So, let's take a look at their skills. You start off with supercharged void shields. This isn't really that necessary for them. I think that their main battleships, generally speaking, are ones that you want to keep protected. So you're going to have them nestled far off in the heart of your fleet, and they're going to be using long-range artillery, and they're going to be using long-range missiles, and they're going to be using a lot of stuff from as big a distance as possible. They're not going to get into a position, generally speaking, where you're going to want to have the supercharged void shield, because ideally you shouldn't have to have it. It can potentially be a good crutch, though, especially if it becomes common to assassinate them with like macros or something like that, just rushing in on your capital ship. It's hard to do against these guys, but it is possible. And if that happens, these guys fall apart. They need their admirals to survive because their bravery is at minus 25. Next up, you got the experimental railgun shot. This is a pretty okay weapon. It's not the best in my opinion. It is a good way to put out some extra consistent damage, and it is also one of the better starting ones in my opinion. It can be used to finish off ships, it can be used to sort of help out with a fight there. It can be used if you manage to get a bunch of enemy ships out in a line or something like that, in which case it'll do a lot of damage, but that's pretty rare. What's good about this is it's just a good amount of fairly reliable damage. Next up is the multi-spectrum probe. This is actually nearly mandatory for a lot of compositions for these guys because they are so ordnance heavy. So you're going to definitely want to have these guys who can launch out your fighters, your bombers, and your other stuff there. Almost going to be a guaranteed pick even up to level 10. In my opinion, there are other ways to get that vision, but I think this is one of the more reliable ones. Next up, Auger Disruptor Bomb. These guys don't really have stealth. They're light cruisers that you would use that with are pretty meager. You're not going to, generally speaking, go for a stealthy light cruiser rush all in or something like that. And because of that, Disruptor Bomb is, generally speaking, not going to work for these guys. Their escorts could potentially make use of that, but it's not enough to make an entire strategy of, because while their escorts are good, they're good at very, very long range where you don't need the Auger Disruptors, and they're very good in a sort of intangible sense there because their weapons damage is pretty low. Next up, you've got the Stasis Bomb. We actually don't get the Stasis Bomb, sorry, that's one you unlock later, so we'll ignore that for now. Navigational Shields. I don't think this is a faction that really needs it. They're fairly immobile. You're generally speaking not going to be drawing enemy ships through asteroid fields, so I'd give this one a skip with this faction. You could huddle yourself behind an asteroid field or something like that, but in the asteroid field and traveling through it, generally speaking, not going to be a go-to strategy for these guys. Multi-spectrum sensor. You don't necessarily need these, ironically enough. I find that for these guys, as long as you're capable of getting through stealth with the mass number of escorts that you're going to have, that's going to be more than enough. And identification range doesn't help you with gas clouds, which is when you would want to use the multi-spectrum probe. So this is really not that useful in my opinion for these guys. It can be okay if you're going for a more gun-heavy approach, but generally speaking, that's not what you're going to do with these guys. Next up, Seeker Turrets. This is applied to your flagship and requires them to be in brawling range. I don't like this particular one, although if you're going for some weird strategy where you're just sort of in the mix there with your fleet, this could be good, but you really don't want to be in the mix with your flagship just because of how important they are to the overall survival of your fleet. Attuned lens coating. This is nice. It's going to be able to give you that extra range to keep your battleship out of the fight. This only applies if you're using one very specific ship in the entire fleet, so I don't know why the hell this is even here. But there is a ship that's got a good amount of ion cannons, which are actually just lances. So you're going to want to take that for that ship only, and if you're not taking it, then you're not going to take this. Targeting Coordinator. This is kind of okay. Well, in the lock-on stance, every friendly Tau ship within this ship's identification range has the accuracy of its railguns enhanced to exceptional accuracy. So what you're going to do is you're going to have a single escort sort of loitering around near your fleet that's on lock-on target. That's going to give all of your other ships within that range exceptional accuracy. The boost between normal and exceptional accuracy is not very good. So this is not a great bonus, but it's kind of okay. It's not really going to make a humongous difference there. Now, For me personally, I think that just because all of these options are a little bit trashy at the start there, I generally go with the attuned lens coding and targeting coordinator with full knowledge that they're not great, but they're the ones that I can actually use with the fleet composition I have. If you're playing a fleet that is going to be in their close range, seeker turrets could be potentially good. If you are playing a lance heavy one or something like that, then the multi-spectrum sensors can be okay. Navigational shields if you think you're going to be kiting through other terrain, which you're probably not going to, let's be honest there. Supercharged void shields would pair well if you're doing something like the seeker turret strategy. Auger disruptor bombs pretty much never. I'm going to go with the experimental railgun and the multi-spectrum probe, as well as the attuned lens coding and the targeting coordinator. So anyway, let's take a look at these guys and their ships. Now, I actually find these guys' ships to be really fun to play, but they're kind of derpy in a lot of sort of ways out there. They are, after all, converted freight ships, as opposed to dedicated warships. So anyhow, for escorts, we've got the Orca. The Orca is important to note because you're going to take some, probably. They're a fairly weak ship. They've got 1 lance damage, and they've got 1.5 macro damage. So the amount of damage you're putting up from these guys is pretty low at 2.5. One of that is lance damage, though, and these, generally speaking, are quite cheap. They're pretty okay for scouting things out, but they're quite slow, honestly speaking. They're not the best escort out there. You're going to end up having them because you're going to get them for free from other ships out there. The Messenger is kind of a niche pick. It's got the targeting systems buff, which increases the accuracy of turrets by 5% within a small radius. Its weapon damage is 1 per second. It's really, really not good at fighting. You would just, generally speaking, have this around so you can use that targeting system bonus there. I often forget to bring it with my fleet, or when I've got one around, I often forget to keep it bunched up with my ships, but it's pretty good for its particular, very niche role. The Defender, this one's got the missile launcher with 2 projectiles, it's got the double-barrel railgun turret, and it's got the double-barrel light railgun artillery for a total of 2.5 macro cannon damage, which is pretty low, but this is a fairly inexpensive vehicle. It's got the 400 hull, and it's got the torpedoes, and the torpedoes are what makes this worthwhile. Next up, we got the Niksar Dao. This thing's actually got 6 damage per second, but split across both sides because it fires them broadside, which is really strange for an escort. What's also notable about this thing is that it's got a lot of just general durability. It's got 400 shield, 400 hull, which means that this thing is capable of dipping in and out of combat while sort of giving off some shots or whatever, and being a general nuisance while also having a decent amount of survivability to it, much more so than you would generally expect from escorts. And if it's getting its shields back constantly, it's gonna be able to soak up a lot of damage. The only problem with these is that despite that, they still die pretty quickly if someone bumps into them or something like that, and it's hard to get the damage output to really matter out of these guys. For a 59-point escort, it's a little bit overexpensive for what they're asking for. Light cruiser over here. This is the Ilfanor Kelshan. I don't like this vehicle. It comes to the gravitic hook, which means that you're taking some orcas. I don't think that it's worthwhile taking this vehicle for the orca. Generally speaking, the reason that the gravitic hooks are good is it lets you go over the normal cap if that's the sort of fleet that you're going for, and there are situations where that's going to be useful for these guys. But I don't particularly think that you're going to want the Ilfanor Kelshan because it doesn't do anything other than carrying that. Railgun artillery to the front there, which is the macros, only does 2 damage per second between the two of them. Double barrel railgun turret does 2 damage to all sides, basically. So you're looking at 4 damage per second to the front, potentially, or, 2 of it split to the sides. The heavy railgun battery weapon is what makes this kind of okay. It's got a decent amount of damage at 4 per second, which can combine with those turrets for a total of 6. So this is a capable enough broadside ship there in some ways, but not very. Next up is the Ilfanor Dilith. This is out of the two of them the one I think is viable. It's got 2 lance damage to the front there. It's got double barrel railgun turret, just the same as the last one. It's got the light ion cannon battery weapons that fire 1 damage to each side, so you've got a little bit of lance damage to each side as well. And then you've got the railgun, heavy railgun battery weapons, and same sort of damage output of this one. So basically, you give up the gravitic hook there, and you gain access to the light ion cannon, as well as gaining light ion cannon artillery to the front instead of the artillery. This is a better variant of it. It's pretty inexpensive, and the sort of combination is not the worst in the world. I think that this is actually a fairly competent ship. It just doesn't really have much of a position that I would want to have in this type of fleet, because this is a sort of broadside brawler, and it's not an amazing one. It's a good one. It's not an amazing one. So you're generally speaking going to want to use something else just because this doesn't mesh too well with your fleet composition. It's going to also run away very quickly because of the bravery -25, meaning that if you're using this as a frontline sort of vehicle there, it's not necessarily going to do a great job of sticking around long enough to do that. Valar shivaji. This thing's actually quite a good ship there. It's got the 6 torpedoes, launch bay, which is capable of only doing fighters and bombers, by the way. Next up, you get the double barrel heavy railgun coaxial. This is only capable of firing to the front and to one side each. So one of them can fire to the left, one of them can fire to the right. Both of them can fire to the front. Next up, you've got the ion cannon artillery, which only fires to the front there. It's got 2 damage from that one. And it's got the ion cannon battery weapons, giving 2 damage per second to each side. So this is unlike the other ones, one that you're probably going to want to fire directly forward. It's not really a ton of damage, but it is kind of okay at it. Now, one of the things that I have to point out between the Larshi Vashya and the Larshi Tolku is that Tolku has got 14 troop value, which means that it's much harder to kill this through boarding actions. Still pretty much the same otherwise, but it is also a little bit cheaper. So what's the difference here? Well, it's got the same torpedo launcher, the same launch bay. It's got the double barrel heavy railgun sort of thing going on there. It's got the railgun artillery instead of the lances. So this is a big hit in terms of it. Not having the ability to use those ion cannons, not having that lance damage is a little bit of a pain. Heavy railgun batteries to the sides there, so this is also a much heavier broadside ship. I think that the Vashya is a little bit better, but not really that much, honestly speaking. I think that, broadly speaking, the Tolku is the one that I'm going to take, just because it's 3 points cheaper, and it's pretty much got that better troop number, which I think is important. Also, I like the heavy railgun battery weapons for the broadsides a little bit more than I like those 2-point ion cannons. Not much, but a little bit. Demiurge Bastion here. This thing's quite decent. Cutting beam is pretty powerful. It's got 83 armor to the front. It's got some pretty good stats all around it. Torpedo launcher, you have to notice that this is a regular torpedo launcher, and that's an important difference. It's got launch bay with 2 sets there, and unlike with the others, these do have this sort of more standard fighter, bomber, and the assault ship, whereas the other ones just have the fighter and bomber. So this is a nice little upgrade in that sense there. Lance artillery, it's capable of firing 2 damage per second to each side. Macro battery weapons to the sides there, 6 damage per each side. And then you get the light macro battery weapons to the front, dealing 7 damage. This is a pretty nice ship. The only problem with it is that it has to fire in every direction to get the most out of all those guns that it has. And you are paying for all those guns, so that's going to be a little bit of an issue. It also has one problem here in that it has got not only the independence of -25 bravery, it also runs away a lot easier than other ships thanks to the mercenaries attribute. Not necessarily the most reliable ship, but it is a very, very powerful ship, and it's a very tough ship. So even if it does run away, you probably are going to get a lot of value out of this guy. Next up, you get the battleships. The Galley Vashya here is the carrier type. Railgun artillery, 6 damage per second to the front there. It's pretty weak. Launch bays are pretty good there, Gravitic Hook, and then it's got the double barrel defensive heavy railgun turret. This is actually a fantastic weapon, and I wish they had more of them in the list there. This thing's only got 3 damage per second each, but they've got 3 of them for a total of 9. Actually, I think the ones that were dealing 16 were dealing 4 damage per second per broadside, whatever. Anyway, I don't particularly think this is the best of the 2 ships, because its damage output is really bad. It is a dedicated carrier type ship, and it is pretty good at that role. But it is kind of a weird, janky carrier if you're using it in that sort of sense there. Next up is the Galley Borcan. This has got the ion cannon artillery. This is the one that you take if you're taking the focusing lenses to have the extra 4,500 range on your Admiral, because this is the only ship that really makes use of that. It's a pretty decent ship all around. I do like it. It's got 2 launch bays instead of 4, but it does have 2 sets of 4 torpedoes for that 8 torpedo wave. This is a really nice amount of ordnance out of this guy. Gravitic Hook for the orcas there, which I don't think is really great, but it is what it is. And it's got the double barrel heavy railgun coaxial weapons there. These are much, much weaker as far as turrets go. It's not really that powerful compared to the Vashya in terms of the macro damage, but I think that the 6 lance damage that can get really good range forward firing is just really, really potent out of this guy. It's also quite a bit cheaper at 13 points cheaper. It's a decent amount. Next up, Kroot Warsphere. This thing's actually really, really powerful, but has some weird flaws. This is a ship that you probably want to keep on brace for impact unless you know you're not going to need it, because this thing's immune to criticals, which is a very, very strange sort of a bonus there. It's got a lot of just great attributes going for it. It can boarding action every direction around it, It's got good troop efficiency, so it deals good damage when it does boarding actions. And it's just all around got ridiculously heavy guns. It's got 4 damage per second per gun. It's got 6 of them. You're not going to be able to shut down the guns because it's immune to criticals. It's got 83 armor all around. You're not going to be able to morale break it because it's immune to criticals. And if you got it on brace for impact, it's not going to take any morale losses, really, if you're bumping into it or doing stuff like that. You have to use abilities, basically, to get this thing to break. It is just a powerful, powerful ship in terms of brawl. It's probably the best brawler in the game. I think that it's actually just a really fantastic design. The only problem is it doesn't necessarily mesh well with what you're doing unless what you need is something to block the rest of your fleet. And it's not necessarily mobile enough for that purpose because people can get around these things. They're pretty slow. They're pretty difficult to maneuver. Still a very, very good brawler. If you're up against a more direct, brutish type foe, like say you're up against the orcs or whatever, the crew war sphere, it's just get it in the way of the enemy orcs as they advance in. They ram into the war sphere and they start taking just ridiculous damage because they just rammed a battleship that's on brace for impact. They just are going to eventually get ground down by it because its weaponry is ridiculous. All that high crit rate that the orcs have just doesn't matter against it. It's a really, really good ship. Demiurge Stronghold. This thing's the much bigger version compared to the Demiurge Bastion. It's very expensive. It's got the plasma cutting beam. It's got the torpedo launcher for 6 volleys, although the 6 volley torpedo on this thing's a bit of a waste because you're probably not going to be able to land those. Next up, launch bay with 3 sets there. It's a pretty decent launch bay. It's pretty good as a carrier. Got lance artillery, 3 damage per second to each side in total. Macro battery weapons to the front there is 14 damage per second. That's really, really good damage per second from the front volley of the macro battery weapons on the Demiurge Stronghold. Then you've got 12 total to each side there. The total macro battery damage on this thing is absolutely insane. Better even than the Crew War Sphere by a decent margin. The only problem is that you can't focus fire it. So you're going to be having to fire out of all 3 sides to get the absolute most out of this thing. But even if you're not getting the absolute most out of this thing has enough weapons to make it work. It's just a very, very powerful ship. The only thing I don't like about it is that it is very expensive. And again, you're looking at a mercenary type ship there that's going to be a little bit harder to keep under control. So yeah, that's the entire Tau merchant fleet at a glance there. Let's take a look at what I'm using for my fleet here. I think there are a couple different ways that you can play them, especially in the sense of like including Crew War Spheres or Demiurges or stuff like that, but this is what I take. So Galley Borcan is my capital ship there. It's got those ion cannons that I can upgrade the range for. All its other weapon systems are primarily just kind of okay, but what we're really looking to be able to do is cause a ton of damage with these missile launchers with this fleet here. Now the Tau missile launchers are different than others. They use the heavy seeker missile barrages. These things will follow enemy ships and track them down and run them down no matter what they're doing unless they can get rid of line of sight to their ship, so if they can stealth. So this is a very, very powerful type of weapon, especially when you're combining it with carriers and a lot of vision. If you can get like a locked on ship with the auger probe, you're going to be able to just fire missiles at it and there's nothing that ship can do. And if you've got enough of these missile launchers, you can just wipe out entire fleets with this sort of stuff. So very, very powerful weapon, very powerful tool when combined with the carrier capacity, because that can also get you vision. Next up, we got the 3 large ttold coups. These are just smaller versions of the Galliot. The only difference is that it doesn't have as good weapon systems. You're looking at the double barrel heavy railgun coaxial, the railgun artillery, and the heavy railgun battery weapons. Pretty much just fairly weak ships there. They can run down some weaker ships out there. Their armor to the front is pretty good as well. But mostly, again, they're here for the launch bays and for the torpedo launchers. Then we got defenders. This is actually kind of the most amount of defenders I've been able to get into this type of composition here. We got 4 defenders, and then we got another 4, so total of 8. I group them in groups of 4. These things have those 2 missile launchers each, so you can get a decent amount of missiles fired off of each of these sets. And they're very, very inexpensive. So the amount of missiles per set of 4 of these guys, pretty inexpensive. I do think that this is a really, really great way to buff up that amount. Then we've just filled in some extra space by getting a single messenger. This thing just sort of hangs around my ships if I remember it exists. We also have 3 orcas. You have to remember about that just because of the main battleship there. So this is a powerful, powerful type of fleet composition for certain matchups, but there are some things that hard counter it. It's really annoying if you're up against something like, say, Chaos, where they're capable of just out-carriering you, but if you're not up against a carrier-dedicated fleet, it's a really just horrible thing to get hit by all these torpedoes. Also, if you've got all those fighters and you've got your fighters sitting on top of their fleet and they've got a small number of token carriers, what happens is their fighters engage your fighters as those torpedoes are coming in. their fighters aren't actually going to be able to screen against the torpedoes, so even if your fighters get killed, you end up destroying their ship because the torpedoes could get in. It's really, really great. Against other factions, you know, it's a bit give or take. I find that if you're up against a really good, say, Tyranid player that's able to evade your vision, or a really good Necron player that perfectly gets the star pulses to maximize that effect there, then you can be in a little bit of trouble, especially if you're like against, say, Necrons where they've managed to keep out of your line of sight really, really effectively. That can be quite annoying. Other factions, though, Dark Eldar are potentially an issue. It really comes down to whether or not you can stick any fighters on him. If you get a single fighter to stick, or if you mark his ship for long enough or anything like that, his ship is done for. He's just dead. All those torpedoes just sort of come in and just destroy their ships. So, speak of the devil. So this is going to come down to whether or not I can get line of sight to any of his shit. If I can, great. If I can't, well, whatever. One of the nice things that we have got going for us, though, is the sheer number of escorts. And the large number of escorts do act as an effective way of catching vision of his ships there. Let's see here. I'm seeing a lot of stuff up to the front there. So let's take our capital ship here. We're going to have it set to lock-on stance, which I know might sound weird, all things considered, but if we had all of the capture points near our side, that would have been so much better. But guys are going to be group 2. Problem with this is I'm a very lazy player, so I'm not going to micro this properly, because I never do. Anyway, I think that this is our main battleship, a little bit too out of the way and a little bit vulnerable, but it should be okay here because we'll have lots of fighters and stuff like that by it, or a lot of escorts, and that actually does work quite well against the enemy that we've got here. You know, I'm actually going to just have it like this here, and we're going to give the other guy just running silent there. So the way I like to group these guys normally is just a group of 4 here. It's going to be our group 3. I'm just going to have them over here, and then we're going to have another group of these guys over here. It's going to be group 4. You can get a little bit having these guys unlock on target as well, so we're going to go ahead and do that. And then we're just going to keep our orcas together, unlike usual. Cool. Okay. So these little orcas here, we're going to have them on running silent, unlike the other guys. All right. So now then, okay, so that guy's just a small ship there. Yeah, so I lost line of sight before I could do anything there. Alright, so let's get up towards this gas cloud. If we can keep 3 points, we can win the game, so that's sort of what we're aiming for here. What the hell's this up here? Is that my messenger? Of course that's my messenger. These guys are all bumping into the stupid... What the hell? Usually they'll automatically properly path around this bullshit. So that was a little bit irritating. I'm unlikely to have to deal with too much ordnance under this circumstance here. But let's go ahead and launch a single fighter group into this area here. And our capital ship, I'm going to just fire off this thing this way. Oh, there's some people on my Discord. I'm starting to see some torpedoes coming in, which is interesting. So this is going to like easily blow up all of these little escort ships that I've got here. That's fine. We're just going to keep moving the way we're moving. Okay, so we want to aim for their generators. And I'm not going to bother... Well, actually, what we're going to do here is pop our scanners again. Oh, these are not going to make it this distance. Yeah, we tried to aim those too far away. Our torpedoes are coming from, like, much, much too far away. Oh, we're also going to run into our own torpedoes. Cool. That was really dumb of me. Yeah, I was thinking that my, like, capital ship was by there, but I was wrong. Still, let's just move these guys up here. I'm surprised actually that he has torpedoes. Usually it's not the torpedoes that these guys take. My Discord is just absolutely... popping off here. Anyway. What the hell are people doing? Alright, so let's get these guys up here. Okay, so we'll have 3 strategics. That's fine. See if I can land one of these on them this time. I think I accidentally all had fold something. Oh yeah, I all had fold these guys. You know what? That's actually not that bad in this instance. Alright, so we're going to have 3 of the capture points at this point. Nope. Oh, he ran the hell away. Okay. You know, I'm really confused as to what my ships are doing as far as, like, travel goes here. That was interesting. All right. Just suicide this one, I think. Yep. Got the destroyers, or this guy's yeah, so that's gonna suck, but whatever. Just gonna have to brace for impact with this guy here. Is that up already? Holy shit. Okay, that seems wrong, but yeah, we got a mutiny on our capital ship. That's going to be the end of things, I think, to a certain degree. Oh, not if that's happening. I think this actually might be over in my favor all of a sudden. Oh, we can execute now. Come on, let me do it. Come on. There we go. All right. So yeah, Dark Eldar continue to be like a super annoying faction for like everybody, but it's pretty manageable for the Tau. I think the Protector Tau are actually considered like a hard counter against the Dark Eldar right now, just because they've got so much forward macro battery power that it's just like the Dark Eldar try to like approach and immediately blow up. It's a little bit less hard countery here because it's a lot harder for me to get my torpedo waves off. Like you can see that it was hard for me to get torpedoes. Also, like Dark Matter Cannon is absolutely bullshit. It's like the most powerful ability in the game. But yeah, despite that, you know, it's not actually too hard to beat that kind of thing with the Tau. They've got lots of forward firing power. They've got the ability to spot because you're generally speaking going to have lots of escorts. And you've got a lot of threats that can really hurt things. So that's kind of, it's an annoying matchup, but it is a matchup that works in Tau's favor. So anyway, I hope you found this video enjoyable. And of course, as always, I hope to see you guys all next time.